Okay, I'll begin with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody.
Good morning, Pandit.
Okay, we have been discussing Sutta number 53 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the Sekha Sutta. This is the discourse on the disciple in higher training. And last time, we got through paragraph 10, section 10, on wakefulness. And so now we come to section number 11. This is going to be on the 7 good qualities. So you have to remember now that in this sutta, the Buddha, actually the venerable Ānanda is discussing the Sekha. This means a disciple who has gained the initial breakthrough to the truth of the Dhamma. And so this kind of disciple acquires access to the full Noble Eightfold Path and all of the other 37 Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, the factors which are the aids to enlightenment. So now, because this disciple has the vision or the insight into the ultimate truth of the Dhamma, he could never fall back or regress. But in order to progress onwards to the final aim of the Dhamma, he has to cultivate a number of factors or qualities. And so Ānanda is explaining the kind of training or practice this disciple undergoes in order to reach the final goal in this very life itself. Okay, so just to review some of the qualities we've already covered. So this disciple, actually the text itself gives a summary or kind of outline of the qualities in paragraph 6. The noble disciple is possessed of virtue. That means the disciple follows the rules of training, the principles of ethical or moral training. Then the disciple guards the doors of the sense faculties in order to prevent the mind from grasping and becoming carried away with pleasant and unpleasant objects of the senses. The disciple is moderate in eating, taking the right amount of food to maintain the health and strength of the body, but not overeating in order to indulge the craving for taste, and thereby to ruin his health and to fall into drowsiness and laziness. And then the disciple undertakes the practice of wakefulness, and this means the very diligent practice of meditation throughout the day, with just a period of rest at night. Okay, so now we come to paragraph 11, which is going to explain what are called the 7 good qualities. And actually the word that's translated as good qualities is Saddhamma. Yeah, so actually the word Sat Dhamma, sometimes if it's a singular, it means the good Dharma, the good teaching of the Buddha. But we have this form, Sat Dhamma, with the plural. Actually, I think most of them have the chart on the jhanas. Anybody need the table on the jhanas? If you do, just raise your hand high. Yeah, raise your hand. It makes it easy for Heidi to find it. That's it. Heidi finds it. Okay, I need one myself. Okay. Okay, so Sat Dhamma you see the word Dhamma, on the one hand it has the meaning of teaching, on the other it has the meaning of quality or factor or element. And so here it has the meaning Sat Dhamma as 7 qualities. Dhamma is quality, and Sat or Sat means the good or even saintly person. And so these 7 good qualities are faith, what's called hiri, translated here as shame, otapa, the fear of wrongdoing, learning, energy, mindfulness, and wisdom. Okay, so one begins with faith or saddha. So saddha is the quality by which one commits oneself to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and the training. And what is the special object of faith that's described here is the enlightenment of the Buddha. It's not so much faith in the Buddha just as an individual person, but in the Buddha as the one who has reached the full enlightenment. And so we have the description here of faith. Here a noble disciple has faith. He places faith in the Tathagata or Buddha's enlightenment, thus that the Blessed One is the accomplished one, or the Arahat, the one who's fully liberated, the one who is fully enlightened to all the principles, all the truths of the spiritual life, the one who is accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, the fortunate one, here it's rendered sublime, the one who has reached the true goal, the knower of the worlds. Then we come to 4 qualities that highlight the Buddha's ability to teach others. He is the incomparable leader. It's actually, literally, it's sarati, which means chariot driver. So the chariot driver has to tame the horses, and the Buddha tames not horses but people to be tamed or to be trained. He is the Satta Deva Manusana, the teacher of the devas or deities and of human beings. He is Buddho, which means, so suggests both the one who is himself enlightened and also Bodhita, the one who enlightens others, who conveys the truth of enlightenment to others. And then he is blessed. It's not such a good translation, because it suggests that somebody has blessed him, but rather it means he's the one who is endowed with all noble or lofty qualities, which he's perfected over many, many lifetimes. And so one places this trust, confidence, or faith in the Buddha, so that this faith in the Buddha acts as one's inspiration, one spur to development, and also it means that one fully trusts the Buddha as the guide along the path. The second of the good qualities, here it's translated as shame, but I want to take the Pali word, which has a more precise meaning. Somehow I think the word shame gets a little bit mixed with the connotations that it picks up from the Western Judeo-Christian heritage, which is not at all intended here. What is meant by hiri, I call this the inner monitor, or maybe you could even call it the voice of conscience, which when one is tempted to do something which is unwholesome or ethically inappropriate, it's that inner voice that tells you this kind of deed is wrong. If you engage in such a deed, such an action, or such thoughts, you're in a way staining the inherent or potential dignity of yourself as a noble person. Maybe we can call hiri also the voice or sense of self-respect that it tells you that to indulge in such unwholesome actions would be a sign of almost an expression of disrespect to yourself. So out of respect for oneself, one refrains from any kind of unwholesome or inappropriate actions. And one does so with the sense that it is in this way, by living up to high ethical standards, that one enhances one's sense of inner dignity, that one preserves one's self-respect, that one unfolds the potential nobility of one's person. Now the counterpart of hiri, the two go together very closely, is the next quality of the good persons, which is in Pali ottappa, which comes from the root tup, which means to burn or to suffer. And so ottappa, we could say, means something like moral dread, and it's the reluctance to do anything that's wrong or unwholesome out of a fear of the consequences or dread of the consequences of those actions. And so, ottappa functions by, in times of temptation, enticement, reminding one that if one engages in such actions, it's possible that others will find out about it and then blame you and criticize you, and then you have to face all of the embarrassment, humiliation of being blamed and criticized by others. And especially in these days, with the internet, one little slip up, especially if you're a prominent person, and everybody knows about it. Like just this past week, this director of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, 2 weeks ago he's sitting on the top of the world. Now he's still sitting there. I think he's been released on bail. He was in a prison in Rikers Island with all these handcuffs around him, and another man I'm not quite following. Did he leave his position as governor of California? He's finished already, isn't he?
Yes.
So he was replaced by Jerry Brown already, right?
Yes.
Somehow I got the impression from one article that I read that he was coming to the end of his term. But okay, a couple of weeks ago he was like one of the most powerful, famous, highly regarded people in the country. Now everybody is looking at him as a renegade, so to speak. A kind of rascal, obnoxious, arrogant rascal, which is... Okay, so this is one of the consequences, blame, criticism from others. And it has to be criticism of good people, not, if you're being criticized by bad people for not engaging in bad actions, one shouldn't be worried about that. Okay, then another type of consequences are legal repercussions of bad actions. And then there are the karmic consequences of those actions. Type of consequence that we can't immediately see, but if we have trust in the law of karma, then we know that if we indulge or engage in unwholesome actions, we're creating unwholesome karma, which is going to rebound upon ourselves and bring us pain and suffering in the future. Okay, so these are some of the consequences of unwholesome action which should engender in us a kind of dread or fear which will serve as a motivation for restraint. And so these two, hiri and ottappa, the sense of moral shame and the fear of consequences, fear of wrongdoing, work together. So in some people one is more prominent, in other people the other is more prominent. I guess it depends on whether one is a more introverted type of person. In that case, the sense of hiri, or moral shame, is more prominent. If one is a more extroverted, outward-going person, then ottappa, the sense of moral dread, fear of wrongdoing, is more prominent. Maybe I'll just ask briefly whether there's any questions on these two qualities. Okay, then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, this is what is called learning. And so it's expected that the disciple who is cultivating the path will be one who has learned much of the Dhamma. And maybe it's probably appropriate that Venerable Ānanda is the one who's giving this discourse. Even though the Buddha himself originally grouped together these 7 good qualities, but Ānanda is the one who is best known for his learning of the Dhamma. So Ānanda says he is one who has learned much, remembers what he has learned, and consolidates or stores up what he has learned. Such teachings as are good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, teachings with the right meaning or right goal, and with the right phrasing, which are correctly expressed, and which affirm or which declare the utterly perfect and pure holy life or spiritual life. Such teachings as these he has learned much of, remembered or retained in mind, recited verbally, investigated with the mind, and penetrated well by view. When you're reading this casually on your own, you might just come across these 5 terms and just sort of sweep them all in just very quickly. But if we actually focus on their precise meaning, we could see that these 5 terms are set out in this particular sequence because what they're actually sketching here is a kind of program of education or learning. I call this the curriculum in the Buddha Dhamma. Maybe it's like the 5 steps of learning in the Buddha Dhamma. So first it says that these teachings of the good Dhamma one has learned much of. and the Pali has literally, one has heard much of. Because in the Buddha's day, the Dhamma teachings weren't written down. So in order to learn them, one has to go to listen to Dhamma talks, Dhamma discourses. And so one has to listen and listen very carefully. And then to get an abundance of teachings, one has to listen to many teachings. Okay, then when one listens to them, one listens attentively, carefully, and then one has to train the memory to retain them in mind. You know, in fact, there are many people who go to many different Dhamma talks. Last week I went to hear Dalai Lama. Next week I'm going to hear this one. I'm going to this center, that center, that center. Then you ask them, well, can you enumerate the 5 aggregates? Let's see. Attention. Can you enumerate the 5 precepts? Let's see. Watch as much TV as you want. Sleep as long as you want. Eat a lot of junk food. No, that's the 5 precepts. Okay, so you have to retain them in mind. And I have to say, we're spoiled. I'm spoiled too, because, you know, we have books, printed books, and so we think, we don't really have to preserve it in mind. Just whenever I want, I just make a little note in a book, or maybe I put one of these little colored tabs. And so when I want to get the information, I just go to the book and open it up, and boom, there it is. But in the Buddha's day, even today it's actually done. You know, the monks who want to really learn the Dhamma very well, they practice memorization. And there are monks in Burma actually who have the whole Tripitaka by memory. And they just memorize, they take the texts, and then they practice from the time they're young. So the mind is very malleable and flexible and agile, and so they can pick up this information and impress it on the memory. Somebody like me, I have to even write down my own telephone number to make sure I get it right. With a zip code number. Maybe because the 4 digits of my telephone number and the second 4 digits of the zip code number are just the same numbers that are scrambled in a different order. So the telephone is 3624, the zip is 3426. So to avoid a mix-up, I have to write them down. Okay, but as one practices, one finds, memorizing texts, you find that the mind starts gaining a certain strength in its capacity to retain information. I used to do this long ago. I used to practice memorizing some text, and at the beginning it was so difficult. You just have to go over again and again and again, even the simplest little text. But then after one practices, it's a little bit like developing a skill of maybe playing tennis or lifting weights. If you begin trying to lift up, when you begin weightlifting, even a fairly light weight, so difficult to lift. But as one practices, one gets stronger and stronger, then one can start lifting heavier and heavier weights. And so in this way, we have these monks who were able to memorize the whole Tripitaka. Okay, so when remembers the teaching, retains them in mind, and then to help preserve them in memory, to get familiar with them, what one does is to recite them verbally. And so this is the practice for retaining the teaching in mind, for impressing it upon the mind, is to recite it over and over and keep on reciting texts that one has learned so that one doesn't forget them. So this is a practice common in Buddhist monasteries in Asia. I spoke last week about the walkway, the chakama, which is located outside the cottage or hut in which the monks live. And so sometimes the monks use the walkway not just for doing the walking meditation, but when they're trying to memorize the text, what they do is to walk back and forth along the walkway, reciting the text verbally to themselves. You know, if you just sit down trying to recite the text, sometimes one gets restless and evam me sutang ekam samayang bhagava savatayam viharati cetavane. What's on TV tonight? But if one is walking back and forth, somehow the energy involved in walking back and forth, or maybe it's the rhythm and the recitation, the rhythm of the walking and the rhythm of the recitation synchronize, and so it sustains one's effort to continue reciting the text. Okay, so this is the way of, building up an arsenal of information, listening or learning many teachings, bearing them in mind, reciting them verbally. But that isn't enough in the Buddha's system of education. But one has to go on to the next step, which is investigating the teachings with the mind. That is, one has to examine the teachings in order to draw out their meaning. See what are the implications of the teachings. To see how maybe the teachings of this sutta correspond to the teachings of that sutta. How the different teachings fit together into a coherent whole. And one also investigates questionable points. Like, what is the exact meaning of this? Could this be in contradiction with that? How do you bring these two points together? And so this is like a whole sphere of education, is learning the meaning, investigating the meaning, and developing what I would call a coherent, comprehensive grasp of the organic unity of the teachings as a whole. The ability to see the implications, the ramifications, the applications of the teaching. And then based on this phase of training is primarily cognitive or intellectual, largely conceptual. But then one has to move on to the fifth stage, which is penetrating the teachings clearly, thoroughly, by view, which means gaining actual insight into the teachings, especially through practice of meditation. Okay, so all of this comes together under the heading of learning. Okay, next we have two qualities which also go together generally in the practice of meditation. Okay, or we could say more broadly in mental training. So one is energy. So here one is energetic in abandoning unwholesome states, unwholesome mental qualities, and in undertaking and developing wholesome states, wholesome qualities. One is steadfast, persistent, firm in striving, and not remiss in developing wholesome states, wholesome qualities. One is not negligent or heedless, but one is heedful, energetic, diligent. So this energy actually goes together very closely with one other phase of the training that we've already mentioned last week. Something I spoke about last week. It's one of the previous factors. The noble disciple purifies his mind of obstructive states. It's wakefulness, right? So when one is energetic, then one is working to abandon these unwholesome states and to develop wholesome states. And basically that's what one is doing. One is devoted to wakefulness. And then this energy works together with mindfulness. And this is a little puzzling, I have to say, the explanation of mindfulness here. Okay, this is in paragraph 16. The text says, here the disciple has mindfulness. He possesses the highest mindfulness and skill. He recalls and recollects what was done long ago and spoken long ago. Now the Pali word mindfulness is sati. And the word sati comes from the verb sarati, which means to remember. And in common Indian usage, even at the time of the Buddha, the word sati was used in the sense of memory or recollection. But the Buddha took the word sati and then gave it a new meaning in his teaching, which means not so much remembering the past, but you could say remembering the present. We could say keeping the present in mind, remembering to keep one's mind in the present, not letting the mind slip off into stray thoughts about the past or hopes and fears about the future, but maintaining an awareness of the present. And so that is the meaning of sati, normal meaning in relation to meditation practice, particularly in relation to satipatthana, the four establishments of mindfulness. And so when practicing the four establishments of mindfulness, one is aware or mindful of what is occurring in the body. One is mindful of whatever feelings are arising. One is mindful of states of mind. And one is mindful of the different factors or aspects of the teaching that one can recognize in one's experience. Okay, so that is the special meaning of sati that the Buddha gave to the word, which is somewhat different from the meaning of sati in ordinary discourse, where it means remembrance of the past. But also it seems sometimes the Buddha uses the word sati also in the sense of remembrance of the past. Probably because when one is attentive to the present, keeping the present experience fully in mind, then it improves one's memory on later occasions so that one could recollect at a later time what is occurring now. And so perhaps this is why in this place mindfulness is explained as the ability to recall and recollect what was done and spoken long ago. So I think in the actual practice of meditation, then energy goes together with mindfulness, not so much in the sense of remembrance of the past, but in the sense of the clear, vivid awareness of what is occurring in the present. And so when mindfulness and when energy and mindfulness work together, then one is energetically attending to the present. And as one attends energetically to the present, one becomes able to see more and more precisely at subtler levels what is actually occurring in one's own bodily and mental experience. And what this eventually uncovers or exposes is the arising and passing away of all phenomena of experience, all the constituents of experience. So in this way, the diligent practice of energy and mindfulness give rise to the seventh quality, good quality, which is panya, or wisdom. And so the text says, here the disciple is wise, he possesses wisdom regarding the arising and disappearance of things, the rise and disappearance of phenomena. And this is the wisdom that is noble and penetrative. It penetrates the truth, and it leads to the complete destruction of suffering. So this is the initial insight into the arising and passing away of phenomena. And that means the insight into what particular quality of phenomena. Exactly. The insight into anicca and impermanence. Okay, so that wraps up how the noble disciple possesses 7 good qualities. Maybe do we have any questions on anything covered so far?
Can you explain again the relationship between remembrance and energy? You were just speaking fast.
I was speaking too fast.
It doesn't complicate.
Yeah. Okay, let us put it this way. I'm a little puzzled by the relationship between energy and remembrance, but I would take it more in the sense of the clear awareness of what is occurring in the present. What we ordinarily mean by mindfulness in the meditative practice. So we have the energy working together with mindfulness in the sense that one is attending mindfully to what is occurring, from moment to moment. And it's the energy that enables one to sustain that mindfulness. And then the mindfulness will also bring to mind, it will sort of expose unwholesome mental states when they arise. And so one could then make the effort to remove them. And it will also expose good wholesome qualities that arise in the mind. And so one then makes the effort to preserve them and to strengthen them. And so what I say is just that when one is mindful of what is occurring in the present, that makes the mind more adept at remembering what is occurring, so that one will have a better memory and be able to recollect what happened a long time ago. I think we have this mobile microphone.
Could you explain penetrated well by view, if that means gaining actual insight through practice? Why can't it say penetrated well by development or by practice?
But I'm not really hearing you clearly. Speak a little louder.
About the phrase, penetrated well by view, if that means gaining actual insight through practice, right? Isn't it phrased as penetrated well by development or by practice, but instead just say by view? My problem is with the word by view.
Yeah, the actual word used here in Pali is ditti, which sometimes it has the meaning of a sort of intellectual view, other times it means through actual insight. I take this to be the actual insight. So it can be maybe taking more broadly, beginning with getting a clear conceptual understanding through investigation, and then through practice going on to direct actual insight. So in that, if we take it in that second sense, then penetrating well by view is not something completely separate from the seventh factor, wisdom. It's penetrating well by view, which means penetrating with wisdom. And the learning of the Dhamma comes to fulfillment with the practice of energy and mindfulness that culminates in wisdom. I think it's good if you take the microphone.
I'm new at this. So I'm having a little trouble accepting the distinction between intellectual insight and grasping a matter more deeply through what I think you're saying is experience.
Yeah.
I mean, to my way of thinking, the intellectual insight may or may not be more limited.
The what?
May or may not be more limited. The sense I get from what you're saying, or what you're saying is, or did you say Ānanda?
Yeah.
Is that the actual incorporation of that insight, physical experience incorporating that insight, is better, and I'm questioning that. I don't know if that's a correct interpretation of what you just said.
Well, let us say that the actual experiential insight does represent a higher stage of development than just being able to understand the principles intellectually. It's not in any way to devalue intellectual understanding, but in the systematic unfolding of the Buddha's teaching, one proceeds from learning to getting an intellectual grasp, and then going from the intellectual grasp to a very direct personal insight. So they are sequential in that way. Okay, so, please, yeah.
Is this energy Dhamma-vichari?
Yeah, you take the... Okay.
Is this energy Dhamma-vichari? Is it the same?
Dhamma-vichaya.
Dhamma-vichaya.
Dhamma-vichaya is investigation of the Dhamma, which seems to cover, under the heading of learning, it seems to cover both the investigation with the mind and penetrating well by view. So energy itself, within the seven factors of enlightenment, this energy is actually the third factor of enlightenment, which is energy.
Is this one of the 10 perfections? Is this one of the 10 perfections?
Energy is also one of the 10 perfections. Yeah. So energy, some of these factors, they fit into a number of different schemes of principles of practice. It's just trying to think of an analogy. Anyway, you could fit them into different schemes, like bricks fitting into different buildings. Same brick fitting into different buildings. Okay, so let's move on, because I want to finish the sutta today. Okay, so now we come to, this is the next stage of training. So how, this is going to be the achievement of the jhanas, which now we come into the stage of real samadhi, deep samadhi. So how is a noble disciple one who obtains at will, without trouble or difficulty, the 4 jhanas that constitute the higher mind and provide a pleasant abiding or dwelling in happiness here and now? Okay, so now this is going to be followed by the standard formula for the 4 jhanas. So I'll go through this and sort of give a brief explanation. Here, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states of mind, the noble disciple enters and abides in the first jhana. Actually, to get the full formula, we should go to page 275, paragraph 19. Well, let's go to 51, actually. Sutta 51. Okay, this is page 451. Okay, having thus abandoned these 5 hindrances, imperfections of the mind that weaken wisdom, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. These are the unwholesome states of mind that have to be removed to enter the first jhana. Usually they are explained as the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, mental dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse and doubt. One enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Okay, now, in entering the first jhana, the mind has arisen, has emerged from the 5 hindrances and all distracting thoughts. It has become focused one-pointedly upon its object. Usually the object is called a nimitta. Often it takes the form of a kind of bright light or bright disk. And in the jhana, one has, according to what's mentioned in the suttas, on the table I have both the sutta exposition and the abhidhamma explanation. So in the sutta, we have a distinction of what is absent, what has been removed, and what is present. So what is absent are sensual pleasures, unwholesome states of mind, and what is present are applied thought and sustained thought. Sometimes I translate them now as thought and examination. But it's best to use or to refer to the actual Pali words, which have more precise meanings. The 2 words are vitakka and vichara. And just below the table there's some explanation of them. Vitakka, which is sometimes translated applied thought, initial thought, mental application. This is that mental factor that applies the mind to the object, that directs the mind to the object, or sometimes it's even said that it's the factor that mounts the mind on the object, that fixes the mind on the object. And then vichara, which is translated as sustained thought or as examination. It's not examination in the sense of looking at the object in order to understand it, but it means a kind of sustained attention to the object. And it's said to exercise a continued pressure on the object, or it has the function of keeping the mind anchored on the object. And so these two factors, vitakka, vichara, are both present simultaneously in the first jhana. So usually one uses vitakka to keep the mind on the object. So say, in our ordinary experience, trying to focus on the breath. We're breathing in, breathing out. And so that function, mental function of keeping the mind on the breath, you could say is the work, or applying the mind to the breath, is the work of vitakka. You know, the mind drifts, again we take the mind, we pull the mind back, apply it to the breath. That is vitakka. It's not so much conceptually or discursively thinking about the object, but applying the mind to the object. Even with the simple thought, in breath, out breath, in breath, out breath. And then as that application becomes continuous, then vichara becomes more prominent, so that the mind is able to remain on the object. And that function that keeps the mind on the object is vichara. The commentaries give some similes to illustrate their relationship. The similes are not perfect, they have some faults. I like the one, the simile of the two hands which are being used to wash the dishes. With one hand, we hold the dish so that it doesn't fall away. And then with the other hand, we take the dishwashing cloth or the sponge and we rub the dish. So the hand that holds the dish, this is like vitakka, which applies the mind to the object. And vichara is like the hand which rubs the object with the sponge. Or again, vitakka is like when you're using a compass to draw a circle. Vitakka is like the point of the compass with the needle that pierces the paper. And vichara is like the point that holds the pencil that circles around and draws the circle. Okay, then as the mind settles down on the object, even before it goes into the jhana, but even early stages, as sort of the chaos of discursive thinking settles down, and the mind is able to keep itself fixed on the object, there starts to rise a kind of sense of exhilaration or ecstatic or blissful joy. That is what is called piti, rapture. And along with this rapture there comes a feeling of powerful pleasure. It's not just a gross sensual pleasure, but it's a physical pleasure felt throughout the body, which is sukha, the fourth quality that's mentioned. And so we have applied thought, sustained thought, rapture, pleasure, and then that factor which is the unification of the mind on the object, the mind remaining one-pointedly on the object. That is, it's not mentioned in the Sutta text, but that is what is called one-pointedness of mind, keeping the mind on that one point, the object of meditation. And so when those 4 or 5 factors reach a certain level of strength, they lift the mind beyond this whole involvement in the sensory world. and they lift it to a different plane of experience, which is the plane of the jhanas. And so the initial entry upon that plane is the first jhana. After gaining the first jhana, then the meditator has to master it by entering it again and again, developing the ability to extend the duration of the jhana, to be able to enter and leave it at will. And then at a certain point, one begins to experience the, I call it the defect in this jhana, the fault of this jhana, the shortcomings. The shortcoming basically is that it's still accompanied by vitakka and vichara, by applied thought and sustained thought. And so as the mind becomes more subtle, one could see that vitakka and vichara, even though the state is very peaceful, very blissful compared to our ordinary experience, but it's a little bit like a pool of water where there's still a very light breeze blowing. And so the water, relatively, is still and quiet. But if we look carefully, we can see that there's still very light wavelets, little ripples on the surface of the water. And that is due to the work of vitakka and vichara. And so one has to go on strengthening the jhana factors, strengthening especially one's power of concentration. And as one does so, then applied thought and sustained thought settle down, and the mind is able to remain on the object without any of the activity of vitakka and vichara. And that is the entry upon the second jhana. And so the formula runs here. I'm on page 451, paragraph 21. Again, with the stilling, or at least because he's going in sequence, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, the meditator enters upon and abides in the second jhana, which has, I think this is unsatisfactory, self-confidence. I think it's better to say which has placidity, inner placidity, so that the mind becomes very placid, very clear, very quiet. And singleness of mind. This means because the samadhi or concentration is stronger. Without applied and sustained thought. And it still has rapture and pleasure. But this is the rapture and pleasure which arise from this deepening samadhi, this deepening concentration. And so here, according to the Sutta method on the table, what is absent in the second jhana is applied thought and sustained thought. And what is present is this internal placidity or quiescence, the singleness of mind or unification of mind, and the rapture and pleasure born of concentration. According to the Abhidhamma method, the three jhana factors are rapture, pleasure, and one-pointedness of mind. Okay, again, the meditator masters the second jhana, becomes very thoroughly familiar with it, and then he starts to see the defect in the second jhana, and that is the presence of piti, rapture. Because rapture is a kind of elation or exhilaration, and therefore there's a certain excitability to it. It's not completely quiet. And so the meditator makes the effort to strengthen concentration. And as the concentration becomes stronger, then rapture falls away, and he enters the third jhana. So now we turn to the formula on paragraph 22. With the fading away as well of rapture, he abides in equanimity. Now equanimity starts to become more prominent. And he is mindful, he has mindfulness and clear comprehension. Still feeling pleasure with the body, he enters and abides in the third jhana, which the noble ones describe in such a way as he has a pleasant abiding, who has equanimity and is mindful. So with the attainment of the third jhana, certain qualities which have been present all along start to become more prominent, even to the point that the text actually mentions them. These are equanimity, mindfulness, and awareness or clear comprehension. Rapture is gone, but the meditator still is experiencing this pleasure or bliss that's pervading the whole body. And so, according to the Abhidhamma method, the two factors of the third jhana are pleasure and one-pointedness of mind. Okay, again, the meditator masters the third jhana, and then looking at it in retrospect, he sees that the third jhana is still a little bit imperfect or unsteady because it has pleasure, pleasant feeling. And that pleasant feeling is a kind of catch point for attachment, for clinging. So there's a tendency for the mind to cling to that pleasure of the third jhana. And so the meditator sees that it would be a much subtler state if this pleasure were replaced by the feeling that's called neither painful nor pleasant. And so again, he makes the effort, continues with the meditation, and then when the power of concentration becomes strengthened, then he enters the fourth jhana. And that is described here in paragraph 23. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, he enters and abides in the fourth jhana, which has the feeling is neither pain nor painful nor pleasant feeling, and it has purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. It is as one moves from the third jhana to the fourth jhana, what is abandoned is the pleasure of the third jhana. And so now in the fourth jhana, the feelings that are absent of the other four feelings, pleasure and pain and joy and grief. The feeling that's present is this feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant. It's a very tranquil, very, very peaceful feeling. And when it's accompanied by mindfulness, which is now very pure and very powerful, because it's now generated by this equanimity and accompanied by this equanimity. And so now the fourth jhana, the two factors according to the Abhidhamma method, are the feeling, which is neither painful nor pleasant feeling, and the constant, which is one-pointedness of mind. Okay, I want to finish the whole sutta, then I'll ask for questions. Okay, so that was an excursion into Sutta number 51. Now we come back to Sutta 53. Now within the training, the achievement of the four jhanas is used as the basis for developing the higher knowledges. So now paragraph 19, we're back to page 463. Ānanda gives a kind of summing up what he's covered so far. Now he's going to show that all of this previous training is a process of maturation. So he says, when the noble disciple is possessed of virtue, when he guards the doors of his sense faculties, moderate in eating, devoted to wakefulness, has the 7 good qualities, and he obtains at will, without trouble or difficulty, the 4 jhanas, he is called one in the higher training who is entered upon the way. Then he makes a little statement that's a little strange. He says, his eggs are unspoiled, he is capable of breaking out, capable of enlightenment, capable of attaining the supreme security from bondage. And he illustrates this with the simile to show what's meant by the eggs being unspoiled. It's like there's a hen which has a number of eggs, 8, 10, 12 eggs, which she's covered, incubated, and nurtured properly. And even if she doesn't make the wish, may my chicks hatch and break out safely, the chicks are capable of breaking out and of hatching safely. And so when the noble disciple has all of this background of training, then his eggs are unspoiled, he's capable of breaking out, capable of enlightenment, capable of attaining the supreme security from bondage. And now Ānanda is going to show how the disciple uses this pure mindfulness and equanimity of the 4th jhana as a basis for gaining the 3 higher knowledges. And I'm just going to treat this briefly without taking the full detailed treatment. For the details, you can just go back and read Sutta 51. Okay, so based upon this mindfulness and equanimity, the noble disciple recollects his many previous lives. So he can recollect 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, hundreds of lives, thousands of lives, even whole aeons of past lives, even in detail. So this is the first higher knowledge, and this is called, metaphorically, this is his first breaking out, like that of the chicks breaking out from their eggshells. Again, based upon this mindfulness and equanimity, the disciple gains the 2nd higher knowledge. This is the divine eye with which one is able to see other living beings passing away, in other words, dying and taking rebirth in accordance with their karma. And so, from the 4th jhana, the disciple directs his spiritual vision out upon the world and sees all over the world people passing away and then taking rebirth, and sees how they are being reborn in accordance with their karma from their previous lives. So that is the 2nd breaking out, like that of the chicks from the shells. Okay, strictly speaking, according to the teaching, to achieve full liberation, it's not necessary to gain those recollection of past lives and the divine eye. But what's very common in the Majjhima Nikaya is to bring in all 3 of these higher knowledges. Maybe because many of the disciples in the Buddha's time had the ability to gain those knowledges, and the Buddha himself gained them on the night of his enlightenment. But what's the key higher knowledge is the 3rd one, which is the knowledge of the destruction of defilements. And so this is mentioned in paragraph 22. Based upon this supreme mindfulness due to equanimity, he realizes for himself with direct knowledge, and then he enters upon and dwells in the deliverance of mind, deliverance by wisdom, that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. This is actually called the knowledge of the destruction of the asanas, the basic defilements at the root of the whole cycle of birth and death. And so there are 3 asanas. Oh, my memory is a little cloudy today. Anybody can help me remember them? In the exact order in which they come down in the text? Oh, no cheating, no, what they call it, grips, ponies. I thought you were going to offer them to us.
Will.
You know, when you answer correctly, you'll get a pleasant bum. When you answer, if you answer incorrectly, you get the
hatred.
Sensualness, existence, ignorance.
Okay. Okay, it's craving for sensual pleasures, craving for continued existence, and ignorance. So those are the 3 asanas.
Ill will and doubt.
Ill will and doubt. Where do they
Doubt
come?
the last one.
What?
Doubt the last one?
No, those are the 5 hindrances. Yeah, those are 2 of the 5 hindrances. Okay, so with this 3rd knowledge, then the asanas are completely eliminated, and that opens up the access to what is called the liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. And so that is the 3rd breaking out, like that of the hen's chicks from their shells. Okay, so now Ānanda is going to collect all of the factors that he's mentioned so far into 2 groups. Okay, first group is the group of what is called conduct, which means not only bodily or verbal action, but also mental action. Okay, so we have under charana, or conduct. The word charana actually comes from the word charity, which means to walk. And so this is the way one conducts oneself, the way one walks one's life, so to speak. So, possessing virtue, or virtuous behavior, that belongs to conduct. guarding the doors of the sense faculties, being moderate in eating, being devoted to wakefulness, the 7 good qualities, and obtaining the 4 jhanas, obtaining at will the 4 jhanas. So those make up 15 factors altogether. Virtuous behavior, guarding the sense doors, being moderate in eating, wakefulness, that's 4. Yeah, those are 4. The 7 good qualities make 11, and then the 4 jhanas make 15. So we have 15 factors under good conduct. And then under Vijja, or the higher knowledge, we have the recollection of one's past lives, the divine eye, which sees the passing away and rebirth of beings and understands how they pass on according to their karma. And then we have the realization by direct knowledge of the destruction of the asanas, and the entry upon the liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom. So we have the 3 types of higher knowledge, and these 2, we join them together, we say that the noble disciple is Vijja Charana Sampanno. Actually, this is the distinctive mark of the Arahant, the one who has reached the end or the goal of the path. And so Ānanda says, paragraph 25, he says, this noble disciple is thus said to be perfect, or maybe better, accomplished in true knowledge. So he's Vijja Sampanno. He's perfect or accomplished in conduct. Charana Sampanno. He's perfect in true knowledge and conduct. Vijja Charana Sampanno. And then there was a deity named Brahma Sanakumara, who one time recited a verse in the presence of the Buddha. He said, the noble clan, this is the Kshatriyas, the warrior clan, is held to be the best of people as to lineage, but the best among devas and human beings is one perfect or accomplished in true knowledge and conduct. So, sort of amongst ordinary people in society, we have the 4 social classes. And from the Buddha's perspective, because the Buddha came from the Kshatriya class, maybe this was actually typical in northeast India, the Kshatriya class was regarded as the highest class. So from the worldly standpoint, that's the general opinion. But from the standpoint of Dharma, the class doesn't matter, the social class. But what matters is knowledge and conduct. And so the one who possesses this excellent conduct and this higher knowledge is said to be the best among all the deities and human beings. Okay, and then Ānanda just says that this stanza was well recited by the Brahma Sanakumara, well spoken, it is meaningful, and it was approved by the Buddha. When that deity recited it, the Buddha applauded it. Okay, and then with this, Ānanda brings to an end his discourse. Then you remember that all along the Buddha had been present. He had been lying down for a while because his back was hurting. And so now the Buddha, he was listening to Ānanda as he's lying down. Now he gets up And then he applauds Venerable Ānanda, and he says, good, Ānanda. It is good that you have spoken to the Sakyans of Kapilavatthu about the disciple in higher training who has entered upon the way. Okay, that brings us to the end of the sutta. Okay, I should ask whether there's any questions. Maybe we could have just 5 or 10 minutes of questions. Then we'll have more discussion after the lunch period.
Can you just give me the Pali word for energy?
Energy is virya, all right. Can you see? Let me take, there are some questions coming from the internet. It seems to me that many aspects of the 7 good virtues or good qualities are related to the ego self, such as shame and energy driven by willpower. If one really needs to go in some park without public toilets, should he hold it because of shame? How would a selfless person act? This is not... Okay. This is a rather complicated matter. Any simple questions? Okay, then I'll take the complicated question. Okay, first, the sense of what's called shame, or here again, it's not shame, but more self-respect. It's not really related to the ego self, in my opinion, but it's a way of using the sense of self to develop a sense of, let us say, a sense of restraint over the disposition towards unwholesome actions, and to serve as a motivation towards wholesome actions. But it's not intended to bolster the ego as a way of exalting oneself over others. And of course, some people can apply energy driven by a kind of will to power, but this is an energy which is not motivated by personal ambition, but by the effort to actually overcome the clinging to the view of self. Then if one has to go to the toilet, I don't know if it's night and nobody is around and one has to go very urgently, one could go in the public park, maybe dig a hole and then bury what is deposited. But normally one would look for like a restaurant, a gas station. Next question, do the senses of the body stop functioning by the time the mind is in jhana, starting with the first jhana or only in the 4th jhana? The way I understand it, some people say that the senses completely stop functioning even in the 1st jhana, but it seems to me that even in the 1st jhana, one is not aware of sense objects, but if there's a strong sense object imposing, one will be able to pick it up. For example, if there's a loud sound, a loud noise, it will sort of register in the mind and one will emerge out of the jhana. But it seems normally within like the 4th jhana, one would not be aware of sense objects, but here we have an expert on the question whether one could hear sounds in the 4th jhana. She's written a section of her dissertation on that topic, so well, this person is someplace else, not in the room right now. If you want to discuss it, maybe you could get the thesis of Venerable Cynthia and read hearing sounds in the 4th jhana. Any other questions? Okay, we'll break for lunch now, and then if you could think of any questions, keep them in mind, and we'll discuss them after lunch. Okay, let us end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the deities and all the other beings. Akasata Chumata Devanagam Hidika Punyantam Amodiva Chiram Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chumata Devanagam Hidika Punyantam Amodiva Chiram Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chumata Devanagam Hidika Punyantam Amodiva Chiram Rakantu Mam Param Eta Vatacham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devan Modantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Eta Vatacham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Buddham Modantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Eta Vatacham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Satanu Modantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Baba Upadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayu Bhavana Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Kamuchantu Pusantu Vibhuti. Okay, I should mention just that next weekend there will be a meditation retreat on Brahma Viharas, actually starting on the 27th, May 27th. So there's still scope to register for that. So if you're interested to take the retreat, this is especially emphasizing the meditation on loving kindness, but also bringing in compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity. Venerable Dhammadipa, the abbot, will be conducting the retreat. Starts on the 27th and ends on June 1st. And so we won't have the class next Saturday, but the next class will be in 2 Saturdays, that is June 4th. And the next class will take Sutta number 57. This is interesting and a little bit amusing sutta, called the dog duty aesthetic, about some of the practices that were observed in India during the Buddha's time. And we'll sometimes see them in India even today. Okay, so thank you for your attendance. And we end with the usual way, with 3 bows to the Buddha.